India has been a very monument-centric country. And I've written this a number of times and spoken about it, that we will, as a nation, obsess about the yellowing of the white marble at Taj. But, a few hundred meters outside, not even 100, a few meters outside the Taj, we will see an utter, chaos, urban chaos in Agra. And we sort of, as a country, have been so focused and myopic in our view, which has been so monument-centric, that we have never looked at the monument's context, which is the urban setting.
It's so good to have you with me. And, the conversation I wanted to do today was focused on heritage conservation, but as a part of urban regeneration, especially with this new idea of the Urban Challenge Fund. And I was wondering how this can fit into the idea of the Urban Challenge Fund and, create a really good private-public partnership. We've seen the National Culture Fund before. We've seen the way it's functioned. Do you see, great potential in this idea? Do you see that it can be used as a way to regenerate some cities? A lot of good work has been done. So let's talk about that.
I began my career in conservation with the premise that I didn't want the entire dialogue or monologue really in conservation in the last 30 years and even longer, actually, since the establishment of the Archaeological Survey of India in 1867. India has been a very monument-centric country. And I've written this a number of times and spoken about it, that we will, as a nation, obsess about the yellowing of the white marble at Taj. But, a few hundred meters outside, not even 100, a few meters outside the Taj, we will see an utter, chaos, urban chaos in Agra. And we sort of, as a country, have been so focused and myopic in our view, which has been so monument-centric, that we have never looked at the monument's context, which is the urban setting. And therefore, we can, in whether it's national policies like the Archaeological Survey of India, which of course have their hands full with looking after the monuments, but very unfortunately, city planning, urban planning, regional planning has never engaged with the monument, or vice versa. And we have lived in these silos where a bunch of archaeologists are looking at the monument, town planners. Our country really has faced an absolute abandonment of its responsibility by town planners and urban planners. And I think as a community, they have failed the nation because we have looked only at blanket bylaws. We have looked at two-dimensional markings on blueprints, and urban planning in India has been limited to land use plan. And beyond that, it's been one-size-fits-all policy. So in a city like Mumbai, the same bylaws that applied to Nariman Point would apply to Banganga or Girgaon. And I'm talking about every city, it's not Mumbai. And in Delhi, you have more than 111 urban monuments, urban villages, which also are the repository of some of the greatest monuments of Delhi, be it Firoz Shah Kotla or Mehrauli or Zamrudpur or any little urban village, Khirki, Begumpur. They contain some of the most beautiful urban, some of the greatest historic buildings, and yet because of this one item called Lal Dora, you draw a red line around an urban village and devolve yourself of the responsibility of planning for them. So over the last 8 decades, they have been turned into slums, literally, because everybody has rebuilt. You can, historic Havelis have completely vanished from Delhi. They used to have some beautiful historic Havelis with arched entrance gateways in all these little villages, and they have been demolished to be replaced by concrete dabbas that are 4-floor high because it's being used as the dustbin of the rest of the city. So while you might have a planned Lodi colony or a greater Kailash, you are dumping all your unnecessary, unwanted activity into Lado Sarai and Zamrudpur, and we have choked our historic monuments. And the pattern repeats. We have lost hundreds and thousands of historic Havelis in Rajasthan because, until very recently, Rajasthan did not even have this basic vehicle, which is regional town planning, that could have an act that could look at urban precincts and historic neighborhoods. We have lost immeasurable urban heritage in all our historic cities because, fortunately or unfortunately, whether it's Delhi or Calcutta or Chennai or Mumbai or Hyderabad, and the list goes on, our historic inner city areas have also been the commercial centers where real estate prices are high, and therefore development pressures have been greater on those buildings. And in the absence of any urban bylaws or protection that actually protects these historic buildings, we've been able to only protect our monuments, and what we have lost is a colossal amount of historic building stock. So we have lost privately owned Havelis, privately owned vernacular housing across the states, from Kerala to Madhya Pradesh to everywhere else. So it's been a long time coming. That's a long preface, but at least it's now as a national policy. If we're looking at this, then we really need to act fast.
Do you think something like the Urban Challenge Fund can actually help this kind of sort of just wanton destruction, can prevent it?
Two things. One is, it's a very welcome initiative, and yes, it is required and will be helpful. But having said that, it needs a lot more support. For example, if there's an Urban Challenge Fund and it's promising a certain amount of money to help protect or to conserve urban areas, right now the gap between the amount that the Challenge Fund is giving and what can come through other sources is something that we need to look at. Because are we looking at 25% of government funding for to cover project costs? What about the remaining, and how are we mobilizing that? And we also have the double whammy of rent control, for example. So if you are an owner of a Haveli in, let's say, Purani Delhi, and you're only getting 10 rupees or 50 rupees as your rental, and there are 30 other tenants, and the onus of maintenance and repair is still falling on you as the landlord, it doesn't make sense. So why on earth would you put money to take care of your historic building? The same applies to Mumbai, where rent control has been, a vice-like grip, and because of that, buildings went into desolation, dereliction, dilapidation. And the government's answer for this was not to look at the cess repair, was only able to just make sure the building does not collapse. So beautiful heritage buildings like Jar Mahal, for example, that had gorgeous timber carved balconies. Once it went through the repair board repairs, all the balconies were removed, and because the repair fund would only be able to provide for concrete, and the scheduler rates would not cover Minton tile, cast iron, Burma teak, and then you would turn this into like a really pathetic slum kind of a building, because none of the beautiful carving or materials that were traditional and part of the building's authentic nature would fit into the square foot rate allocated by the repair board. The story repeats everywhere, and that is why then even later what were considered to be relief sometimes has sounded the death knell of heritage, because other incentives, so-called incentives like cess reconstruction, DCR 33-9, 33-11, then actually incentivize the demolition of those historic buildings and replacing them with higher FSI and new construction. So that really pretty much demolished hundreds of historic buildings that were of even grade 3 value, and some were not listed because these new rules actually overruled heritage grade 3 and precinct. So in historic precincts like Kotachiwadi, for example, where more than 70% of the buildings are cessed buildings because they're old tenancies, you are actually incentivizing the mass demolition and mass reconstruction and taller structures. And it's also because our planners, as I said, have let us down, because in other countries like England or like Singapore in the Asian context, when they looked at urban bylaws, they first created heritage precincts, and then within them the bylaws address height, they address materials, they address streetscape, they address street elevation, going down to the level of signage and street furniture design. And in our country, firstly, heritage regulations are few and far between. Individually listed buildings are very few and far between, and even those rare cases of cities that have adopted them, they have not been able to notify special precinct a new building or what the controls are to ensure that development, when it happens in context and is respectful to the historic fabric.
What about areas like Marine Drive in Mumbai, which is supposed to be, the whole area is supposed to be a historic preserved area?
Marine Drive was not notified, it was a proposed heritage precinct introduced in 1999. And I worked for 14 years to have it inscribed on UNESCO's World Heritage List. And because of that, it is now a notified heritage precinct. Having said that, even today, under the present regulations, the buildings listed as grade 3, and Marine Drive, doesn't have grade 2 and grade 1 buildings, can be demolished under cluster redevelopment or other policies if they want to, because the government framework was the regulatory framework after DCR 67, which was the heritage regulation. After that, it got further diluted by subsequent regulations, DCR 33, 7, 11, and therefore cess reconstruction was permissible for heritage precincts, which completely brought Marine Drive to the level of vulnerability that, had it not been for the World Heritage Site status that I fought for, we would have lost that too, because you're talking about prime real estate. So it's and this is Mumbai, which is probably the best among all cities in terms of having been the pioneering city to adopt heritage regulations in 95, to be the first city to look broadly outside the ambit of just monument restoration to urban precincts. It listed urban precincts, but still the regulations do not have enough teeth. There are no urban controls that are part of the development plan and therefore notified across India. And that makes and then there are no incentives. How do you address rent control structures where the owners don't have enough money to plow back into the maintenance? What do you do about issues like this? So therefore, yes, it is very welcome, the challenge, but what about the gap funding? How do we bring that is probably a challenge.
That's the biggest issue, isn't it? Say in a city like Mumbai, people like you have been able to mobilize a whole lot of private, funding from concerned and people who really care about the city, and a lot of good work that you've done, especially around the fort area, which wouldn't have been possible without their partnership. But every city doesn't necessarily have this kind of, urban centric, sort of very conscious citizens who want to preserve their city, who want to keep it, keep its history intact. So what does one do in creating that culture? Because that culture also has to be created for the UCF to actually work. Because otherwise what happens is that the corporates have their CSR funding, which usually follows a trend. And then there's, a handful of individual philanthropists whom people like you have to sort of you have to get them excited, and then there's nothing else really. So how does one create this culture of people, individuals or institutions who really care about their city and want to develop parts of it? And it can be done through the UCL.
I would suggest, I would say that it needs to be two-pronged. Firstly, UCF as a central government initiative is laudable, and it's very welcome. But when they're making grants, maybe if they could use, the central government could then use it as a carrot and stick policy to get states that are, while they're being onboarded to receive grants on these projects, to then make commitments at the state level, because land is a state subject and urban regulation is a state and local governance subject. And therefore, in areas or states where these funds are coming, those states which are the beneficiaries should be able to make a commitment that they will adopt urban regulations that are and notify heritage precincts, because individual buildings are add up to heritage precincts, and if you keep demolishing and rebuilding historic building stock, we are losing this whole urban, and in a way we are losing the imageability and the character of their cities. So firstly, state governments have to come on board saying that we will bring in the essential mechanisms, the regulatory mechanisms to ensure that heritage precincts are identified, are listed, are notified, and then heritage-specific guidelines and bylaws are incorporated as part of the master plan. And then the third part would be, yes, what do we now do about the gap funding? So can there be incentives in terms of you allow for change of land use or building use, you allow mixed use or certain amount of gentrification and hospitality based, whether it's hotels or restaurants, and bring in revenue through that. Do you allow for certain flexibility in, even sometimes the rules are themselves cause of the devastation of the buildings. For example, if you are restoring a building, or if there's a building under 33(9) under cess reconstruction, you have to demolish and raise that structure to the ground to be able to build a new structure, instead of saying, oh, let me at least save the frontage or save the key historic elements of the building. So they need to review their own bylaws and see what are the bylaws that are enabling and what are the bylaws that are actually threatening historic building laws, building stock. They need to start looking at materials very carefully, and I think this is where we need to interlink between skill development and other ministries, because we have also this entire tradition of building in mud and brick and chuna and lime, which we are completely erasing at the altar of cement concrete, Alocobond and glass, and which is not only a climatic disaster, but in terms of if you look at a historic skyline or a precinct in Ladakh, there should be rules and mechanisms to actually disincentivize people from using concrete and incentivize people to use traditional materials and traditional techniques, and not only be able to skill up the existing labor force and construction force, but also to ensure that the building traditions that are inherently part of the tradition and culture of that region continue. Otherwise, we are just wiping out, hundreds of years of built heritage and history and knowledge systems. So that needs to be done, whether we're looking at a region like Ladakh or whether we're looking at a region like Rajasthan. When we need to generate employment, why not look at employment skill sets as a vital asset of the country rather than looking at it like a liability? And why not use urban conservation and restoration and conservation of historic buildings as an opportunity to be able to revive these, to be able to skill up our artisans, and to be able to then create the entire ecosystem for both to happen at the same time. And then I would suggest that even if you were not able to use rupee for rupee as a matching grant, could Shramdan, could labor, local material be included in this matrix? Because 20 years ago, when I worked on Basgo, restoring the Maitreya Buddha temple in Ladakh, when World Monuments Fund gave a matching grant, the local Basgo villagers matched it with their material and their labor instead of dollars. So could we bring in something like this, where a local village community or a neighborhood could say, we will use the mud and the resources that are local and our local craftsmanship and use that to match your funding.
Such lovely ideas, Clearly, someone needs to listen to it carefully. But the last question really, Abha, is that have we found, have you in all your travels and your work, have you found examples where people have actually made this work, where knowingly or unknowingly they've sort of accepted an urban challenge in their cities and transformed a particular area? I
think my entire career I've tried to engage with that aspect rather than a monument-centric approach. And in 1998, I had proposed the first urban conservation guidelines for Dadabhai Naoroji Road in Mumbai. And what it led to was a voluntary, community-driven project where the shopkeepers themselves voluntarily removed their signboards that were facing historic buildings and agreed to a one regular signboard design that would fit better into the arches. This was done completely voluntarily and funded by the people. This was then followed by putting street furniture. We used to have those funny penguin litter bins and yellow railings in Bombay then. And for Mumbai, this became not just the first pilot in Mumbai, but in India, where the local shopkeepers paid for the street furniture and the cobblestone and the railings and the pavements outside their shops, whether it was a small Valiji's luggage or a large Thomas Cook or Times of India. So this was done way back in 98, and I'm just glad to know that that was a small pilot, but today smart cities and governments and municipalities are spending so much money on doing this for many cities. Similarly, I would say Kala Ghoda Association, of which I'm a founder member, was another such, it was another such pilot project where we were just 6 people and then we grew to a larger group and we formed the Kala Ghoda Association with the idea of converting central business district into a cultural district by using the open spaces, whether they were the parking lot or pavements, into spaces for art, performing art, culture, food, and we brought in, I remember that we got in Zakir Hussain and his father to perform live to an audience, unticketed audience in a car park in the first Kala Ghoda festival. And we did not raise money because we were conscious of the fact that we didn't want to ticket these performances and we wanted art to be accessible to everybody. But then we got 5 lakh rupees from HSBC and 5 lakh matching grant from Dorab Tata Trust. And with that, we restored the Elphinstone College facade, because we felt, even though it was a government building, but it was like the public realm. It became the canvas of Kala Ghoda, and therefore we felt as citizens that we needed to restore it. And over the last 25 plus years, Kala Ghoda Association has raised funds to restore many buildings of which I've been a part of, whether it's the David Sassoon Library or the Knesset Eliyahu Synagogue. So that is one such case that perhaps could be repeated in other towns. But presently, I'm very excited about the possibility of that becoming another template for urban clusters, villages and towns, is what we are doing at Vadnagar. So in Vadnagar in Gujarat, which is also the hometown of the Prime Minister, we took up a study and identified more than 400 small houses, which are privately owned vernacular houses. Some of them are, a lot of them belong to people of the lowest economic sector. We have people who have even small houses built under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and also some old beautiful houses with the vernacular wooden carved doorways and wooden brackets. And rather than look at any large project and monument, we discussed with the government the idea of creating an urban streetscaping proposal for Vadnagar, and we've taken 4 such precincts within Vadnagar, around the market, around Prerna School, around the lake, where the government of Gujarat is putting in 80% of the restoration cost, and the owners and the local community is pitching in with 20%. And even there, we come across cases where people are too poor to even afford that. And then people ask if they can do it over time, or whether they can get involved, in some other manner. But that project is underway, and it's street by street we're improving the town. And I think that is the way to go, because yes, you can have a great monument, but when you bring a visitor or a tourist, you don't just take them blindfolded to see Red Fort and then open the blindfold at the gate of the Red Fort. You have to take them through Shahjahanabad and Chandni Chowk, and then it breaks my heart every time to see a beautiful Haveli that was and now covered with aluminum cladding and glass, and it could be such a beautiful and something that we should be proud of, one of our greatest historic cities. And yet, because of these policies of whatever I've discussed earlier, that we've really turned this into a sad state of affairs.
Thank you so much, Abha.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Thank you.